right. Hey guys, Monty here, retired lawyer, active father. And today we're going to be talking about food and nutrition for your baby after the fourth trimester, after the first 3 months of his life or her life. And I'm going to be talking to you guys about three things basically. First is to continue with the breastfeeding for at least the first 6 months of your baby's life, and ideally in some form, or at least some amount of breast milk through the first year, or at least up until the end of the first year of his or her life. Second thing I'm going to talk about is introducing solids, because I think you can and perhaps should introduce solids in the second 3 months. Definitely after the first 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding, that would be an appropriate time to introduce solids. But depending on how your baby's doing, you may choose to introduce them in the second 3 months before you hit the 6 month mark. And that's what we did. And I'll tell you guys how we did it. And the third thing I want to talk to you about is food and nutrition generally, after the first 6 months, essentially for the rest of your kid's life. We'll talk about that. As far as continuing the breastfeeding, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that you exclusively breastfeed your baby for the first 6 months, and that you continue breastfeeding some form or fashion for the first year. I believe, however, that it's medically, okay. Ask your doctor about it. But like I said, you may choose to start introducing solids before then. I really think what AAP really wants people to do is breastfeed, exclusively, at least for the first 3 months. And I'm not trying to put words in their mouth, but they say it's kind of a conservative benchmark. Look, just stick with breast milk for the first 6 months. It's kind of a uniform rule of general application. They're putting something out there that is, they're broadcasting it to everybody. So I think it's perhaps the safest thing, or it's, maybe even the best thing to have a baby nurse on nothing but breast milk for the first 6 months. The gap between breast milk and formula begins to close after 12 weeks. And my understanding is that by 6 months, it's non-existent. In other words, nutritionally, and maybe non-existent is too strong, but nutritionally, they're a lot closer in terms of nutritional value, and formula is not just okay, after the first 3 to 6 months, but it's recommended because it's very nutritious. I mean, it's cow's milk that's been modified to make it more easily digestible by infants, but it's chock full of nutrients. Try to get a brand or type of formula that you feel good about. But it's good nutrition for an infant. It's not that it's bad nutrition, but I just think it's critically important that you stick to just breastfeeding, at least for the first 3 months, if at all possible, for the reasons that I discussed in my video on breastfeeding in the fourth trimester, that I'm not going to repeat here. So I just think the optimal start to life for an infant is to have nothing but mother's breast milk for the first 3 months, and let's say 3 to 6 months, and then we'll leave it up to you and your wife, the mother of your child, to decide for yourselves when's in consultation with your pediatrician, when's the right time to introduce solids. But try to stick with the breastfeeding for as long as possible, and if you could do it exclusively or predominantly for the first 6 months, that would be my advice as well. And again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not trying to pretend to be one, but I think there's listening to the experts. I think there's good reason to believe that that's going to give your baby the best start in life. We introduced solids at 4 months and 1 week old. So our son had just completed 4 months of life, and after about a week thereafter, we began introducing the simplest solid foods. And then we started supplementing with formula about 2 weeks after that. So when he was 4 months and 3 weeks old, we began supplementing with a bottle of formula, you know, uh, just pre-mixed, ready to go. Eventually from there, uh, the breastfeeding dwindled, because what happens, as you may know, and I'm not sure I made this crystal clear in my video on breastfeeding, but mom's breast milk is a miraculous demand and supply system where the body will produce as much milk as the baby needs. And if you have twins, the body will produce that much more milk. And, in the olden days, back in the tribal villages, and or even nowadays somewhere in the world, if there's a woman who needs to breastfeed multiple families' kids for whatever reason because mom can't produce or is unable to, that woman's mammary glands will rise to the challenge and produce as much milk as necessary. I mean, I imagine there's some limits. Could one woman nurse an entire village? I don't know, but definitely more than one kid. Definitely more than just her own kids. Her body is up to the challenge, assuming that she's getting sufficient calories and is healthy. But if the demand is not there, then the breast milk supply will dwindle. So that's why it's important in the early going to bring the baby to the breast every 2.5 hours in the first week or so, every 2.5 to 3 hours for most of the fourth trimester, as we keep calling it. It's important to stay on that cycle, both because that's basically a newborn baby's metabolic rate, at the time it takes for them to take a good nap and wake up hungry, ready for another feeding, but also because it's going to keep mom's milk supply revved up and ready to go as you begin to introduce solids. And if you choose to supplement with formula, if you do these things, then you'll see some diminishing in her supply, and that's to be expected. It wasn't a problem for us. My wife, the breastfeeding from 5 feedings a day, we brought it down to 3 breastfeeding sessions a day, first thing in the morning before the midday nap, and then before bed. And from there, it went to 2 times a day, first thing in the morning and then before the midday nap. And then eventually it was just first thing in the morning, as we headed towards the end of the first year, and then we just stopped altogether. So that's to be expected, and it's not a problem. But I suspect, or I believe that it's probably still good to get a little bit of breast milk in there as part of the infant's diet. How we did solids, we actually introduced solids in the beginning with breast milk. We started with simple rice cereal. I will tell you start to finish, because what we did, and I think this is good advice, you want to pick one solid at a time, introduce it, test it for a week, at least, more than a couple days or more. See how the baby tolerates it. If there's any kind of a reaction to it, you'll know what it is, because you haven't been trying to introduce more than one solid food at a time. So we did it week by week. And in order, we did rice cereal, butternut squash, oatmeal or oat cereal. Perhaps it would have been better to do the oat cereal first, just simple grains before you move to vegetables or fruits. But we did butternut squash second. Mix that in, blended that or something and mixed it in with breast milk too. My wife reminded me. We did oatmeal and oat cereal third, as I said, then green beans, then peas, then avocado, then carrot, sweet potato, pears, peaches, white peaches, then yellow peaches, because we had both on hand, bananas, beets, plums, okra, blueberries, then egg yolk and potato, chicken and peas, and finally toast and butter with apricot jam. So the meals are getting more sophisticated by that point. And at that point, or by that point, he was over 9 months old. And that is basically week by week the solids that we introduced, at least the ones we kept track of. And from there, it went, who knows where. Um, but he was over 9 months old by that point. And I would suggest, you do the same. Just test things out, one solid food at a time. Start with simple rice cereal. This is baby rice cereal, not like, you know, I don't know, rice cereal for adults. But they'll have it in the stores and you'll be able to find it. Start with those simple grains and then just test out different fruits and vegetables. And eventually you'll get to, things like egg yolk and um, chicken and, butter and toast and all that. We introduced cow's milk around the time my son was 1 year old, and he loved it. I think he liked formula too once we began supplementing. But boy, the first time we did cow's milk, he was about a year old, and we gave him cow's milk, full fat, whole vitamin D milk in a bottle. And he took one sip, pulled the bottle out of his mouth, looked at it like, what the heck is this? And where has it been all my life? And then just proceeded to guzzle it down. And he loved it so much. Um, you know, my wife tells me, and I believe her. I mean, I was there, but she reminded me too that it's easy to make your own baby food. You just pick a fruit or vegetable, peel it if you need to, steam it, if in the case of vegetables, for example, blend it. Um, if it's early and you want to maybe perhaps ease digestion further, or you just want to get some breast milk in there, you might mix it in with breast milk, but that's it. Try to buy organic as much as you can. You don't need me to tell you, I don't think, but there's information online about the advantages of purchasing organic produce. And I know there's a cost and price differential, but I think there's a clear difference as well between organic foods and conventional foods. So, if you can buy organic, but you don't need to go buy pre-mixed or pre-made processed baby food to the extent it's processed in any way. You can just buy your own whole foods and steam them if you need to, blend them, and you got baby food right there, and your baby's gonna love it. They got fresh, clean, blank palates, and they're ready. They're up for anything. They're down to try all of it. Can't speak for all babies, but assuming just everything is proceeding along reasonably well, and you've been breastfeeding them, and I don't think you have a problem introducing solids. Um, but anyway, that's how we did it. For what it's worth, the cow's milk and introducing the cow's milk around the 1 year mark leads me to my final point, which is just food and nutrition generally. I mean, what do you do after the first, you know, 9, 12 months? After a year, you can give the baby honey, which it's advised by everyone that you'll ask not to give an infant under 1 year old any honey because of the risk of botulism, and you can look that up. But say you're at the 1 year mark, you've introduced solids over the course of 6 months or so. What do you need to know about food and nutrition generally? Well, look it up online, because there's certain things like sushi, raw fish, that you want to wait until a kid is much older. So obviously do your own homework, but from bird's eye view or something, I'll just tell you that nutrition for toddlers, infants and toddlers, and young kids, 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old, 6 years old. That's where we are now. It's not so very different than nutrition for you and me. So if you're eating well, and you're helping your family eat well, then your kid's going to be eating well. And some of this stuff are things that we all know, or we've spent most of our lives hearing. Um, I'm not going to try to be your dietitian or nutritionist, But I've learned a lot about these things. I've spent a lot of my life paying attention to it, and now at my age, I'm thinking more and more about longevity and just refining how I take care of my health to try to optimize my health as much as I can. So for what it's worth, if you'll allow me to get on a soapbox for a minute and just give my little spiel about food and nutrition, I'm happy to give it. And here's what I would say: that at the end of the day, it boils down to 5 categories of food that you should incorporate into your diet. And if you're asking me, folks are saying, what should I eat? Somebody tell me what I should eat. I hear about paleo and keto, and back in the day there was Atkins, and all these different diets, and different voices on the internet and influencers, and everybody's saying something different and sometimes alike. Here's my take on it. Here are the 5 foods you should eat. I'll give them to you right now. 5 foods, okay? Whole grains, number 1. Whole grains, okay? Whole grains are things like wheat, rice, oats, corn, quinoa, and there's like a billion other grains, buckwheat, sorghum, barley. These are all grains. They're plants, but they're the product of the great agricultural revolution in human history that was responsible as nearly as much as anything for getting us to this point in civilization. They're good quality calories. There's good complex carbohydrates, glucose, carbohydrates in the form of glucose that you get from these grains. But I say whole grains because that's the critical difference. Here's a crash course on whole versus refined grains in case you don't already know. Nature produces these grains whole, okay? And by whole, we mean that they're comprised of 3 components. There's what's called the endosperm, which is the actual, carbohydrates and some protein. When you look at bread, the wheat plant, basically, it has an endosperm, which is what white or refined bread is left with. You're still getting the bread. That's the endosperm. That's what you're eating. That's where most of the calories come from. But there's something called the wheat germ, and there's something called the wheat bran. Bran is where most of the fiber and some important nutrients reside. The wheat germ is where there's some oils, fats that are important and nutritious, as well as most of the vitamins, most of the other nutrients, and the antioxidants. The problem is that the oils in the wheat germ go rancid the fastest. So some time ago, we decided as society or whatever to refine these flours because somebody discovered or realized that wheat flour would keep a lot longer, and you can keep it on a shelf for longer. And if you had to transport it across the country by freaking caravan or something, the flour would keep forever and ever, or at least a lot longer when we refined the grain. So that's what we did. And we may not have realized it at the time, but by doing so, we're left with the calories, but we've stripped this food of its important vitamins, minerals, other nutrients, antioxidants, and equally importantly, of all the dietary fiber from the wheat bran, which aids in digestion and keeps our engine and motor running, cleanly. And it helps feed the good bacteria in our gut microbiome that support our immune system, help break down foods, absorb nutrients, beat back and crowd out the bad bacteria, do wonders for our health in general. So eat whole grains, but make sure that they're whole grains, not refined grains. There's nothing refined about it other than in the sense that it's kind of, processed that way and stripped of things. It's more accurate to call it stripped flours. Stay away from those. I'm hopeful that in the future, all grains will be whole grains by default, because with supply lines and technology being what it is, I don't see why that can't be a viable vision for the future, and I hope it is, because just simply replacing processed refined wheat flour with whole grain wheat flour, given how important wheat is to the American diet and human diets around the world, that is one of the single most important things we can do to improve everybody's health. That alone will increase Americans' fiber intake, and it will go a long way towards improving health outcomes for everybody, everything from heart disease to cancer and the rest. So eat whole grains, number one. Number two, fruits. Number three, vegetables. I'll just leave it there because, everybody knows what fruits and vegetables are. And really, it doesn't even matter whether one food is a fruit or a vegetable. Is a tomato a fruit? Is a tomato a vegetable? Doesn't matter. Who cares? Doesn't matter. Just eat them. Whether they're fruits or vegetables, these are other plants that, some we humans have been consuming since our hunting and gathering days. Others we've cultivated from the ground, but, they are plants and they're nutritious and they help us live better and live longer. So eat them. The fourth category, I can't sum up with just one word, but it's a category for nuts, beans, seeds, legumes. Legumes are things like peanuts, peanut butter, lentils. Look up what legumes are, and there's all kinds of different beans. There's black beans, pinto beans, kidney beans. There's all kinds of seeds, and there are all kinds of nuts. These two, many of them we've been consuming as a species since we are hunting and gathering days, and others at least as long as the agricultural revolution. But the human body and organism is very familiar with these. They're chock full of nutrients. You get nutrients from nuts, beans, seeds, and legumes that you don't necessarily get from the other categories of food. So collapse that into one category and try to eat as much of that stuff as possible. Nuts, for example, have a lot of very, very good healthy fats that you're not necessarily going to find in a lot of other foods. I'm not sure we eat enough of those kinds of foods in this country, at least. Last thing is fish. Fish as a protein source. And I highlight and emphasize that because I think what really matters is fish. I don't think Americans have a problem eating beef or chicken, but for some of us, depending on who you are and where you live, you may not be eating a lot of fish. And you got to understand that there are certain nutrients in fish that you're not easily going to find in other foods, and certainly not in the same quantity, like omega-3 fatty acids, these long chain polyunsaturated fats that are important foods for the brain, and it's they're literally brain food, but they also play an important role in cardiovascular health and reducing your triglycerides circulating in your blood. You're improving your overall lipid profile when they talk about LDL cholesterol, for example. Omega-3 fats are powerful nutritious fats that we should be consuming. And if you think about it, humans evolved close to water because it was essential for life. So from the earliest time of our civilization, we ate fish. Spearing and capturing fish probably was a lot easier a lot of times than it was to get a good hunt. And even if you didn't have a successful hunt, you might be able to eat fish. In any event, we rely on water to live, and we've evolved, even today, major cities, close to water for the most part. I mean, irrigation has obviously changed that, but that's how we've evolved as a species and as an animal. And we've always eaten a lot of fish. And now in the 21st century, increasingly, at least some places in the world, you see that, fish is disappearing. And I think it's costing us a big, big price in our health. And Google or research longevity and what folks refer to as the blue zones of health, where people live the longest. Places like the Mediterranean Sea in Okinawa, Japan. Sometimes people will say, well, it's olive oil, and olive oil is great. You should definitely try to cook with olive oil, and dress your salads with olive oil, and consume olive oil because it's good for you. It's an omega-6 mono unsaturated fat, but it's good for you. Um, but I don't think it's the olive oil as much as it is the fish. I think people in the blue zones, or in the zones where people are living the longest, are eating more fish. So the fifth category, let me run them down again. It's whole grains, fruits, vegetables, a fourth category of nuts, beans, seeds, and legumes, and a fifth category of fish. My recommendation: stay away from the fish that is high in mercury, like shark or swordfish. The bigger the fish, the more likely that they may have high levels of mercury from the pollution or contamination in the waters. Try to go for fatty fish that is high in the omega-3s. Salmon is a delicious fish that I love. I've eaten it my whole life. It's not a very fishy fish. If that kind of smell or odor or taste, flavor is not your cup of tea, and it actually turns out to be not only is it one of the least fishy fish, turns out to be one of the healthiest, best foods you can possibly eat, because its omega-3 content is so high, even relative to other fish. So eat a lot of fish. A few honorable mentions, because I just wanted to give you those 5 categories. If you focus your diet and your baby's diet around those 5 categories, you're going to have a healthy baby and you're going to have a healthy family. But let me just add a couple other things that I think, if I could expand it to like 7 or 8 different items, I would include them. So I'll give them honorable mention. Eggs. Eggs are one of the pound for pound or calorie for calorie, one of the single most nutritious foods. Get organic, grade A, pasture raised, cage free eggs from chickens that are treated reasonably well and not forced to wallow in their own feces or something like that. Uh, Try to spend a little bit to get the good organic high grade eggs and eat them, and try to get your baby to eat them. Those also contain omega-3 fats, not as much as fish, but they do. Yogurt for the probiotics, all around the world, so many different cultures, peoples, get their probiotics from yogurt. Yogurt is just a staple across Asia, Europe, I don't know, everywhere. But there's other options, in Korea, they have kimchi. In Germany, they have sauerkraut. Sourdough bread has probiotics, good bacteria. Miso soup, pickles, although you got to be careful. Pickles, if they're fermented pickles, they'll have probiotics, but mostly the pickles you find commercially are just marinated in a vinegar type solution, and not terribly unhealthy, but you're not getting the probiotics. But yogurt is great. When you're sick, try to eat more yogurt. Populate your digestive system with good bacteria, even though they already live there. Especially if you're taking antibiotics. Boy, my advice, I'm not trying to play doctor, eat yogurt, because you're killing all the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria that's making you sick. You need to replenish your gut microbiome. It may not be a silver bullet or panacea, but I think it's very helpful. Last thing I would say for honorable mention is milk and cheese. Some cheeses have probiotics, but I'm just a fan of milk. I guess if you're vegan, it's not going to work for you. But I'll tell you, the milk we get for my son, not for us, but for him, we get this Growing Years Horizon brand organic milk, Growing Years, and it's whole, full fat milk, high in vitamin D, even higher than the vitamin D fortified milks you'll see in the store. But it's also got 50 grams of omega-3 fats. It's called DHA. It's got 1 gram of prebiotics, which is soluble fiber, to help further taking care of the digestive system. And it's got, what is it? 50 milligrams or something, some amount of choline. Look up choline because I think it wasn't until the 90s that experts kind of homed in on choline as an important um, nutrient that is also hard to come by. There's a lot of choline in fatty fish and salmon. Choline helps transport those good fats through the body, if I'm not mistaken, among other functions it serves. But there's a lot of choline in wild Alaskan sockeye salmon or other fatty fish. Check it out, look it up, verify that. And there's a lot of choline in eggs. Um, but the milk that we get even has a little bit of added choline. So we are not opposed to milk and cheese in our household. My son is, I don't know, you look at his makeup and, his body, it's like 50%, if not more, of this boy is basically wheat and milk, you know? That's what his cells and that's what his body is made of. And, milk has a lot of calcium for growing bones and good teeth. Um, Milk is fortified with vitamin D, which, if you're not eating a lot of fish or getting enough sun, it could be a problem. Many people are deficient in vitamin D, so consider that as well. I'll leave you with a final tip about, just eating right, and as it applies to your baby. Um, you got to set the tone and the standard in your house, would be my advice. You and mom decide what you eat as a family, and baby is going to follow suit. Baby's not going to be, the first and most influential, important influence in his or her life is going to be you and mom, and they're going to look to you to know and understand what to eat. And the way you eat in your household is the way your baby's going to eat. So try to make it a point, don't listen to, go against the grain, man. Go against the grain. I think when I look at the supermarkets nowadays, I see a lot of options that I didn't see growing up. I think history is trending in the right direction. I think we're making progress towards stocking our shelves with better foods for everyone. There's more whole grain wheat incorporated into everything, including children's snacks, and it's encouraging. But there's also a lot of added sugar in the food we eat. There's a lot of processed foods that are marketed and foisted upon our children. And if you don't kind of try to swim against the current a little bit, um, you know, you might just fall into uh, the wrong kind of diet by default. So, I won't sermonize too much, but um, food is important, in these first years. What do they say? Um, 80% of brain development is in the first 3 years, and or 50% is in the first 3 years of life, and 80% in the first 5 years. Well, the brain consumes more calories than any other organ in the body, and it's just it's very greedy for the nutrients. It needs those nutrients to develop. It needs things like those omega-3 polyunsaturated fats um, that we don't get elsewhere in our diet. Um, and it just stands to reason that if you're feeding your baby, your infant, your toddler well and nourishing his body and his mind, that it's going to pay off. Thanks for listening, and take care. I'll see you next time.